Today, we will cover some fasting tips for diabetics. So, what happens when you fast? Should diabetics fast? Today, it's all about the basics. What the body undergoes during a fast and how that relates to your blood sugars and your health. And lastly, I'll cover how do I personally fast. This hybrid method I utilize is easy and it's less disruptive on my extremely hectic daily schedule. Diet, exercise, and fasting are the three cornerstones to this insulin-dependent type 1.5 diabetic. This helps keeps my sensitivity sky high and has my A1Cs in the mid to low fives and has me looking and feeling great and energetic all day long. So stay tuned to the very end and I'll show you how I incorporate fasting into my daily routine. But before we begin, let me welcome all you resilient diabetics out there. This is where we turn ordinary struggling diabetics into extraordinarily well-controlled diabetics. If you don't know who I am, my name is Sampat, and I am an insulin-dependent diabetic diagnosed a little over 5 years ago, so the proud owner of a pancreas that has gone on a permanent and lifelong vacation. So not only am I diabetic just like you, where we will be walking that walk and talking that talk together, but I do also have a university Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition dietetics, and as you can imagine, that comes in very handy in discussing all the intricacies of being a diabetic. The unique information presented today will only be found here on the Resilient Diabetic. New, life-changing episodes are released weekly. So if you want to learn more and you want to be notified, the only way to do that is to hit that gray bell that's on the very top right section of your screen. You have to hit the subscribe button too, and of course, that like button. Everyone has different relationships with food and meal times. What works for some people may not work for you. Intermittent fasting is a very personal journey, and although it can take a little longer to find the most effective method for you, you will ultimately have to play around with meal frequency, composition, and length of fast to find out if fasting is actually right for you. The most common type of fasting is what's known as the 16-8 method, which involves fasting for about 16 hours and reducing the eating window to about 8 hours. For example, a person can have dinner around 7 p.m., they'll skip breakfast the day after, then eat lunch around 11 a.m. Other forms of fasting would include fasting for 2 days a week, 24-hour fasting once or twice a week, or even fasting every other day. The reason there's a lot of buzz about fasting, that is not eating for a period of time or cutting back drastically, especially if one is diabetic or has prediabetes, is the idea that it'll help you lose weight, help you control your blood sugars better, and maybe need less medicine over time. And all of that is true to an extent, but we have to be careful here because it's been touted as the cure-all in many diabetic circles, and it is highly proclaimed by many of these new age experts out there on the internet. The premise behind fasting is to ultimately control insulin. Insulin, or too much insulin in the body, is what's known as hyperinsulinemia, is generally the cause for the vast majority of health issues around the world. As our society tends to move less and become less active, so does the need for the restructuring of carbohydrates and calorie requirements to fuel the body. So not only are we moving less, but we're actually eating more at the same time. And what more of in particular? Carbohydrates. And this problem is actually twofold. Not only are the amounts of carbs that we are now consuming just too much, but as importantly, the kinds of carbs matter too. And we're not talking about the evil refined packaged carbs like the potato chips and the sodas, but the healthy carbs like the whole grains, the pastas, the rice, that are also just as dangerous to the human body when consumed in excess. Once carbohydrates are consumed in excess, and it doesn't really matter whether it comes from a can of soda or a bowl of rice or even whole grain breads, the body now has to find a place to store it because the body's fuel sources are already full due to the fact that there's inactivity. So what does it do? It converts those carbs into fat and stores those in places that the human body was not quite designed for. In between body organs, inside muscle tissue, up and around the liver, and around the belly area. This specific fat then turns and creates resistance for our body's insulin, meaning that this fat in particular makes our body's insulin worthless. So the body has to continually make more and more and more insulin to help drive and lower blood sugars lower. And this deadly cycle continues until that breaking point occurs. You're either diagnosed as a diabetic or your diabetes just gets far, far worse. So if one fasts, the consumption of food, most importantly carbohydrates, are then restricted. Thus, one will have lower insulin levels during the day. That would lead to weight loss and better whole body health markers. Why? Because the body now starts to reverse this dangerous cycle, and those resistant fat stores are now actually being used directly for energy during the fast. There are some small studies that suggest fasting may be helpful for people with diabetes, but fasting is not part of the mainstream treatment. The American Diabetic Association does not recommend fasting as a technique for diabetes management. They are focused in solely on lifestyle changes, including medical, nutritional therapy, and more physical activity as their cornerstones for weight loss and good diabetes control. If you are thinking about trying the fast and you have diabetes, you're going to want to know what the risks are, how to avoid them, and why you should always check with your doctor first. So what are some simple tips? Tell your doctor you're planning on fasting. Make sure your physician is aware of your plan to fast because your blood sugars will be affected. Stay hydrated, drink plenty of liquids and water during the fast. You're going to need to test your blood sugars constantly while you fast, and if you're new to fasting, stay away from sugary, high-carb foods during that break. Otherwise, you'll undo the whole point of the fasting process. Be aware of overeating, and that's harder to say than to do for many people. If you do have well-controlled diabetes, there's less of a health risk from fasting. And if you're on insulin or any oral medication that does lower blood sugar levels, then you're going to need to test far more often. However, if your blood sugars are not stable and you have wild fluctuations, say 300 milligrams one day to 40 the next day, your doctor or healthcare provider, your certified diabetic educator, may advise against fasting. Now, low blood sugars are your main concern, but for some, high blood sugars can occur, and it's common, especially for those who are highly resistant and have very, very poor pancreatic functioning. Some patients who use insulin think they must stop using it during the fast, and this is where your doctor must advise you. This might apply for some patients who are type 2 diabetics, but for those of us who are type 1 or type 1.5, such as myself, our lives depend on it. You cannot stop taking that background basal insulin. Adjustments will be needed made to both the basal and bolus insulins. Now to some general guidelines. If blood glucose starts to run lower than 70 milligrams per deciliter, which is an indication of hypoglycemia, then it would be time to highly consider breaking that fast with some food and drink that contains carbohydrates. You should also stop fasting if your blood sugar reaches above 300 too. You would need a correction of insulin to stop blood sugars from escalating any further. But what you really need to do is you have to listen to your body. Dark urine, headaches, nausea, and vomiting can all be signs of serious dehydration. If you experience any of those signs, contact your doctor and you should stop fasting. Now here's where fasting can be counterproductive. Intermittent fasting can trigger binge eating habits or disorders. The whole goal is to limit carbs and calories, but if one already does not have a good relationship with food, fasting will only make this worse. We have enough limitations put on us as diabetics already. So if food thoughts are already a big distraction through the day, this may not be for you just yet. Second, I do, however, agree with the American Diabetes Association cornerstone of diet first and foremost, followed by lifestyle changes that includes exercise. I have said getting physically active is the other key to our health model. While fasting does pull off those resistant fat reserves, I don't believe it's the cure-all in isolation. It may reverse some damage and get you off medication, and while that is a great thing, it will not improve you beyond a certain point. So how do I get the best of both worlds? My methods do include fasting, but for more shorter, manageable periods. I do use exercise actually to speed up the process by fasting post-exercise. I usually have my last meal, my dinner, around 6 or 7 p.m. Then I wake up. I usually start working around 4 a.m. in the morning, have my cup of coffee, and then jump on my treadmill here at home in my garage and do about 30 minutes of cardio. Then I'll stay fasted till around 10 or 11 a.m., where I'll have my very first meal. What the cardio does, it accelerates the amount of fat being utilized during the fast, and most importantly, I don't feel hungry at all. And at that very first meal I have, which is actually for me no longer your traditional high carb breakfast like oatmeal and breads, it actually contains low amounts of carbohydrates. It's actually a chicken breast salad with cruciferous vegetables and green leafy vegetables. I'll eat every 3 hours until I go to the gym and train, usually later in the afternoon. And then I will wait at least another hour after the gym to have my last meal of the day, which is around 6 or 7 p.m. And only that last meal post-workout will I have some carbohydrates. And the amounts will vary depending on what body part was trained and my blood sugars. I will still have even more vegetables at dinner as a big outsized portion. So even after I train, and I do take training to the extreme, I'm not overdoing the carbs. There are no plates of spaghetti and no massive baked potatoes. There's simply no need for a diet like that. I'll also create a playlist for you with other related really important videos. And if you watch the next 2 videos on exercise, you will understand more than 90% of diabetics out there, and you'll have a huge advantage. The very first video, is there such a thing as a best exercise for diabetics? And why is this really important for you? When most discuss exercise, they imply losing fat and getting healthier, which is always part of our goal. But for us diabetics, there are other critical components to exercise, and that's what you're only going to find here on the Resilient Diabetic. Which ones will help you control blood sugars better and at the same time drastically improve your health by burning all those stored fat that causes insulin resistance. In the video, how does exercise help diabetes? I mentioned being diagnosed can be a blessing. What? How so? I'll explain that in the video. That includes why our diabetic bodies, especially in this modern, non-active world, have the deck stacked against us with the food choices we make. And that will ultimately make or break us. If you're on a desktop or laptop, use your mouse to click that box right there. If you're on your mobile device, use your fingers. So have a great and productive day, and we'll see you soon with another episode, always released weekly. Bye for now.